Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and it's good to see all you 10-year-olds playing one of my game books. It's brilliant to see. Actually, it's quite interesting talking about fighting fantasy, because writing this new book, I was stuck with a bit of a dilemma to write for it for 10-year-olds, which is the current market, or 40-year-olds masquerading as 10-year-olds, because I'm delighted to say they've survived the test of time. So I'm here to talk about the games industry, why I think games is just such a wonderful medium, not just in terms of entertainment, but also in the potential for fantastic learnings and education, and how games are transformational in all our lives. I mean, when we arrive in this world as babies, we learn through play. Play is natural. We interact with the world and just make many discoveries by play. And as we get older, we enjoy solving puzzles. We are naturally curious and want to solve these puzzles, because that's kind of the motivation of life. And when we attach rules to puzzles, they become games. Now, as was said in the introduction, I joined the games industry not long after chess was invented in 600 AD. I want to turn my hobby of playing games into a career, if possible. And so, two old school friends, John Peake in the middle, Steve Jackson on the left, and we met up back in London in the early 70s. And we all had pretty miserable jobs, badly paid, but we used to enjoy playing board games. And we thought, wouldn't this be a fantastic job to do, to be able to turn our hobby into our careers? So we set about doing that, and ultimately we created Games Workshop, known these days, of course, for Warhammer. But it didn't start off straight away with Warhammer. There was a lot of struggles before we got to that point. We started off publishing this highly glossy, full-color magazine you see here, called Owl and Weasel. And we sent it out to everybody we knew in games, because we wanted to connect. Clearly, there was no other way of doing it other than to write. Clearly, there was no internet, and there was no ways of putting out your message. Anyway, one of the recipients of Owl and Weasel was this gentleman called Gary Gygax. Now, he lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And although we hadn't sent the newsletter to him directly, he got hold of a copy, he wrote to us, and sent a copy of D&D to us, this incredible game here. Now, it didn't look much, pretty plain box with a very amateurish drawing on the front, but as soon as you opened the lid and started playing, it opened up the worlds of imagination like no game had ever done previously, and I don't think any game ever will again. Here was more of a designer game kit than the game in itself. It had no board. It required one person to be the dungeon master, to create a world of monsters and magic, labyrinths of passageways, populating those passageways with rooms filled with monsters and treasure, and the other players to take on the roles of heroes and wizards and magic users and clerics, and go these fantastic journeys of the mind, theatre on the fly, the characters combining as a dungeon party, trying to get through the dungeon, the twisted dungeon of the mind of the dungeon master. So we became incredibly obsessed with D&D. John not so, and within the next 12 months he decided to leave because he wanted to carry on making more traditional games, and we wanted to do this role-playing games. So we thought this was our calling, and we started selling it mail order through our third floor apartment in Shepherd's Bush. We decided to be bold and go over to the United States to sign up all the fledgling games companies. In this photo on the near side is Fritz Lieber, the science fiction author. Next to him, Gary Gygax, inventor of D&D. Next to him, Professor Barker, who created a game called Empire of the Petal Throne. Next to him is me holding the boxes, Rob Kuntz at the far end, another one of the authors of D&D, and Steve smirking at the front. The worrying thing about this particular slide is the first three gentlemen to my left, to my right, are all dead, and I'm kind of next in line. A bit of a worry, but hanging in there. We also got to meet Miss Wisconsin, 1976. I don't know what she's doing, but I'm enjoying myself today at Google. So we signed up all the fledgling games companies and ordered loads of stuff because we were the big shot distributors of Dungeons and Dragons. And how had we got that distribution? Because, as I said, we had no money, and when we wrote to Gary Gygax initially, we only had £50, so we ordered 6 copies of D&D, And on the back of that incredible order, Gary gave us an exclusive 3-year distribution agreement for Europe. Because he was also operating out of a flat in Lake Geneva. So we're kind of being role-playing businessmen about a role-playing game. It was brilliant. So he must have got a bit of a shock when he actually saw us, but it was fine. So we came back, and we'd been beforehand, we'd been kicked out of our flat by the landlord. As I said, we were on the top floor flat, and we didn't, of course, no mobile phones back in those days. We didn't even have a phone in our flat. There was only one public phone on the ground floor, which we shared with our landlord, Paddy. And inevitably, phone would ring. It would be a telephone sale for D&D. We'd run down the stairs. It was too late. Paddy was there first. Hello. You want Games Workshop, do you? Mm-hmm. Click. He got quite irritated by this, and he used to tell us that we really had to leave. And there was people, of course, milling around on the ground floor outside on the street looking for this Games Workshop, expecting to find this shop. Of course, there wasn't one. We used to have to open the window. You want workshop? Up here, mate. Anyway, this couldn't go on. So we were given our marching orders. We had nowhere to live. So we thought, we need to get a bank loan. Let's go and see the bank manager. Hello, bank manager. We've got this great game. It's a role-playing game, which you're a hero, a wizard, and you kill these monsters, and it goes on for days. And the box doesn't look very much, but it really is an incredible game. It's going to change the whole world. And the bank manager looks at you a bit like a dog watching television, has no comprehension whatsoever of what you're talking about, and ushers you quickly outside. So we had to make a decision whether to have somewhere to live or somewhere to operate from. Clearly we needed an office, so we took on an office. And luckily Steve had a van similar to this. This is not this one precisely, but pretty much like it, including the front garden. It was Van Morrison. And we lived in there for 3 months. And people say these days, wasn't it tough? But when you're living the dream, it's not hard at all. You're following your heart, you're following a passion. And yes, it was smelly and cold and miserable, but we were having an incredible time. We were in this smelly old van from about 1 o'clock in the morning to 7 in the morning, but we parked outside a squash club and joined the squash club for a shave and a shower, etc., and got really good at squash by default. And then into our little mail order office, where people actually, if a customer came in, one of us had to leave because it wasn't big enough. And so that's it. It progressed, but it was brilliant times. And I always tell everybody to, if they can, to follow their heart and start their own business if they're able to or want to. Inevitably, we had to expand the business. We'd had a lot of trouble trying to get other retailers to understand what a role-playing game was. They couldn't quite get their head around not just a box that wasn't a contained game, but also you need peripheral stuff like miniatures and magazines and supplements. And it was just too much of a malarkey for them. So we decided to open our own shops because we thought that was the best thing to have as a flagship. And the one thing we wanted to have with Workshop was a Games Workshop experience. So rather than hiring traditional retailers, we decided to hire hobbyists, those who enjoyed playing the games as much as we did. Because whilst they didn't know about retailing as such, they knew everything you needed to know about role-playing games and painting miniatures. And so they created this experience, and they were effectively incredible retailers because of their enthusiasm. So it became a place to go and talk about games and play games. I think it still maintains that spirit largely today. We opened our first shop in Hammersmith in West London. This was April 1978. We were surprised to see the length of the queue on that glorious day. I've been trying ever since, well, in the last few years, to reconnect with some of those people that were in the queue so we can try and do a kind of Abbey Road reunion shot at some point. I've met 3 people so far, and obviously you're all far too young to have been in that queue, but if you know anybody who was, let me know. Might be a bit challenging to do that photo, by the way, because it's now Bosnia and Herzegovina Community Advice Centre, but I'm sure with a bit of Photoshop we can do that. Anyway, I'm no longer associated with Workshop. Steve and I sold out in the early 90s, but as some of you will know, Workshop, publicly quoted company now, doing wonderful things, and have focused completely on their own IP, and I think that's really important. because intellectual property is what builds real value in companies. It's so often the case in the UK in particular that we have to trade away our IP for project finance, so we end up being work for hire. And if you want to build real value into any company, if you're starting up, make sure you retain ownership of your IP, because that's where the value ultimately lies. So we were big role-playing fans. We designed our own dungeons, became fanatical players, wrote some of the parts of the rules and booklets for D&D, and we also used to organize these events called Games Day. I think Workshop still does it today, but ours was very much focused on role-playing and D&D rather than Warhammer Fantasy Battles and Warhammer 40k. And at Games Day 80, Penguin Books took a stand, and Geraldine Cook, one of their editors, was fascinated by some 3,000 or 4,000 people completely consumed and obsessed by playing role-playing games. And she said to Steve and I, would it be possible for you to think about writing a book about the hobby of role-playing games? And we thought about that for a second and thought, wouldn't it be much more fun if we gave people the opportunity to experience what a role-playing book is? And if we could somehow change the Dungeon Master to be the book and give multiple choice, and how's that idea? And we called this idea Magic Quest, and she took it away as an idea, told the MD of Penguin Books about this interactive book idea, and apparently he laughed so hard he banged his head on the desk, saying that would possibly work. No one's interested in interactive entertainment, certainly no one's interested in interactive literature. So it took us nearly a year of convincing, and Geraldine, to her credit, was the person who really drove this through until they decided they would test the market through Puffin Books, because they observed quite rightly this is more likely to be appealing to children aged 9, 10, 11 rather than adults. So the very first Final Fantasy game book came out in 1982, The Warlock of Firetop Mountain, and Penguin Books ended up reprinting the first book about 12 times in the first 6 months because they had no faith in it. They couldn't really get their head around themselves what an interactive book was, but they did, and the variety of the day was playground chat, and the best recommendation you could have, and they were very successful, and that message grew out there. So we finally got commissioned to write 2 more, and here we are 35 years later, and Scholastic, the largest publisher of books, children's books in the world, are now taking on the mantle of republishing, reimagining fighting fantasy. And some of you will have in your hands the new book that I've written to celebrate the 35th anniversary, The Port of Peril. So even though you might think it's too young for you, maybe some 8, 9, 10-year-olds that you know might appreciate it, hopefully you will as well, because I write them for myself, not necessarily for children. So why are these books different? Well, they were taking the essence of role-playing and giving people choice. These were books in which you, the reader, are the hero. They're not a linear narrative where you may or may not connect to the main character. These were an interactive book in which you make all the choices. It was, in effect, Analogue Hypertext. At the end of each paragraph, there's 400 paragraphs, which are, if you read sequentially, make no sense whatsoever. But at the end of the paragraph, you're given a choice. Simplistically, turn left or right. In this case, are you going to talk to this guy or get into the basket, or are you going to carry on walking? So there's hundreds of ways of going through these books, but only one way. And the difference between these books and other choose-your-own adventures that were coming around at the same time is that these are the very first books with a game system attached to them. So it's branching narrative with a game system to reflect the combat and get people to have the sense that they're overcoming the monsters that they meet along the way. People subsequently have called them the gamification of literature. There's lots of terms about fighting fantasy being a sort of one of the great main causes for interactive games we know them today, particularly video games. But back then, we were just kind of making it up as we went along. We were delighted by the success, and art played a very important part in the covers. Because they were a Puffin book, Penguin, the publishers, were worried that because the games were the books were interactive with ghouls and demons and stuff, that they could be frightening. So they wanted very tame covers. They wanted covers that had little toadstool and a gnome sitting on them and butterflies. And we wanted covers that threatened to bite the faces off the readers. And we wanted to use our Games Workshop artists. And we won that argument, I'm delighted to say. And we used some of the best artists around. I mean, this particular guy who painted the Blood Beast on Death Trap Dungeon, Ian McCaig, he went on to create Darth Maul for George Lucas. So we were giving young artists a chance to be able to do what they want to do for themselves rather than being told what to do by publishers. And we also convinced mainly foreign publishers to use our covers as well, for the very same argument that we thought, children get excited rather than frightened by the covers that we offered. Sometimes some territories thought they knew better than we did, and we bowed to their greater knowledge. So I'm just going to show you the cover that was used in Japan of Death Trap Dungeon. I can't possibly comment on that, but you have to make your own mind. Anyway, the net result is it got a whole generation of children reading again. Some 17, 18, 19 million copies were sold. This is theoretically a great thing. They were empowering, they were great for reluctant readers, inspiring children to write their own stories, to become artists, to enjoy the medium. So it was also found that subsequently that Final Fantasy game books improved literacy by 17%, and children were asking their parents, "Hey Dad, what's a sarcophagus?" and wanted to know more and write their own adventures. It really encouraged creative writing. So you'd think you'd get some good headlines in the media, but no, I'm afraid not back in those days, because there was no social media. The children couldn't get their message out to tell their parents that these were a good thing. Being obsessed by these books was seen as a bad thing. The Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide about them, saying, having read, if you read these books, interacting with ghouls and demons, you're bound to be possessed by the devil. There's no choice. A worried housewife in deepest suburbia phoned in her local radio station, said that having read one of my books, her son levitated. So the kids are thinking, for £1.50 I can fly? Really? Oh yeah, we'll have some of that. And the local vicar threatened to chain himself to the railings of Penguin Books until they were banned. There was petitions to have them burnt. There was magazine articles, this one in particular, warning that children actually participate through their imaginations. God forbid that was ever to happen. What a strange thing to do, when you can have nice, safe stuff where you don't have to think. Petitions sent into Penguin Books. We then demand that the series of Fighting Fantasy game books be withdrawn from publication immediately, as we believe them to be dangerous and harmful to children. I've got their addresses. There will be a day when I come back. But the thing is, history has never been kind to games. Back in the 1850s, Scientific American wrote rather alarming things even about chess, that people should be doing much nobler things with their mind than wasting on chess. And of course, when it comes to video games, the media goes into an apoplectic frenzy when talking about some particular games. Now, Grand Theft Auto 5 is a great British success story. It generated $1 billion in its first week of revenues, and it should be celebrated as bringing art and technology together to create this wonderful and interactive entertainment medium. And yet the press largely castigated for its content. And that's wrong for many reasons. A, Grand Theft Auto is rated 18. It shouldn't be played by children in the first place. But it is an incredible achievement. The biggest entertainment franchise in any medium. Is that not a good news story for this country? And there are many blockbusters in video games that are being developed in the UK for global publishers everywhere. We are a great nation at making games. And we've created some great intellectual property in this country. These are some of the companies I've advised or chair or something. They're all doing amazing things, generating original content everywhere. So if we can just pull back a little bit and say, how did this notion of games being a bad thing come from? Is it because play is seen as trivial and has no value whatsoever? Should we stop at a certain age to stop playing games? Why is that? So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. games only really became commercialized with Atari's Pong in the early 70s. Yes, I got into video games in the mid-80s, first designing the launch product for a small developer called Domark. The game was called Eureka. And Domark, with 3 other companies, metamorphosed into Eidos PLC in the mid-90s. And of course, Eidos most known for launching Tomb Raider, and I was executive chairman when we did that. So where did Tomb Raider come from? Again, lots of people think it was developed in the States or in Japan, but it was actually created in Derby, right here, and by this guy in particular, Toby Gard, who was an artist at Core Design. Core Design was owned at that time by Centergold, and we bought Centergold in March '96. We being Eidos PLC. And part of the due diligence period was required me to go around and look at all the studios and the assets of Centergold. And when I went to Derby and saw Tomb Raider develop, I guess you could say it was love at first sight. It was an amazing to see, not just an interesting character, but the fact that it was great technology, great graphics, fantastic gameplay. One of the first games with a 3D character in the 3D world. It had all the planets lined up. But of course, everyone talks about the main character was Lara Croft. And Toby, the artist, was the person who created Lara. Now, he'd been given a task to replace the lead character of a game that Core had originally produced called Rick Dangerous. And the reason is that Rick had a slight similarity to a character in a film I've forgotten the name of, but it was his task to, as the industry grew up and matured, to obviously get its act in gear. So everyone thought that Toby was going to create another male character. But he'd seen the rise of girl power, and Anna Cherry, Tank Girl. And his original sketch for Lara Croft was, in fact, Lara Cruz, was just a simplistic thing. And another thing I say to developers when they're starting off about the point I made earlier about intellectual property is if you can hang on to your IP, it could be worth a lot of money. I mean, what started as a simple sketch turned into a multi-billion-dollar franchise. So that'd be a warning. So Tomb Raider came out originally in October 1996, and Lara Croft became a pop culture phenomenon, not just in the games industry, but way beyond. It became a main entertainment franchise in the mass market. And so it was the power of the brand. Again, when you own the IP, you don't only just get the revenues from publishing, you get all the incremental revenues from licensing and merchandising. And all these brands, powerful in themselves, saw the value of having Lara Croft give them incremental revenue through promotion. And of course, she didn't go unnoticed by Hollywood. Now, Hollywood traditionally created their own IP, looked to literature, to comics, and now they're looking at games because the impact that games is having on society. And we managed to get ourselves an executive producer role because we wanted to make sure that Hollywood didn't take Lara Croft in a direction we didn't want it to go. So we had a veto over the script and over the cast, and when they suggested that Angelina Jolie play the role of Lara Croft, we said that's absolutely fine with us, no problem whatsoever. Yes, those were the jolly 90s, and so reunion with all the Lara Croft models with some old bloke, and it was a very tough job, and I survived it. So console games, still huge, as we all know. Console's not going away. In fact, this iteration of hardware has been larger install base than any other previous iterations. So it's great that's still continuing to grow in market. But for some people, console gaming is a challenge, and the intimidation of a 15-button controller is just too much for some people. And then along came smartphones, and of course Apple in particular, with swipe technology, and then anybody could become a games player by just swiping their finger across the screen and being able to access an all-you-can-eat store. It was transformational for expanding the market, and this was additive rather than replacing the existing markets. Of course, the challenge today, of course, is 2 million users trying to reach an audience of 2 billion people through the world's smallest shop window, but that's another story. For every Angry Birds, there's probably 20,000 dead birds out there, but that doesn't stop people trying to become the next big thing. And I'm not going to go into the challenges of mobile games today, other than say, marketing, monetization, metrics, and margin are the most important things. I don't have time to go into the detail of that. But if I was launching a new game or advising people to make a new game on the App Store, you've got to make sure you have an open mouth and the icon, because that's really important. Without that open mouth, you're doomed to failure. So we've seen games move from a niche to a mainstream audience. We see children still loving playing games, the young adults playing games. You get old people like me still playing games. And we see games pervasive everywhere you go, on public transport, out in the open. People are happy to be seen playing games. We've seen games become a spectator sport, the huge rise of esports and prizes to be won, and people are very happy to watch games being played live, or watching them being streamed, or watching people playing games on YouTube. This is an incredible experience now, and another growing market. The net result is the games industry is a $100 billion industry. It's the largest entertainment industry in the world, and again, a great British success story. But beyond entertainment, I'd also argue in many ways that games are actually good for you. They're social. We're playing with our friends. We're enjoying that social activity. Even for old people, give rehabilitation, a sense of purpose, burning off calories as well. These are a good thing. Games require you to problem solve. You cannot get through a game without solving problems. You cannot advance until you solve problems. And that is clearly a good thing. You're given continuous assessment. You're allowed to fail in a safe environment. No one's going to punish you for making a mistake. In fact, you're encouraged to start again and try again. It's not sort of a binary decision, you're wrong, you're a failure, and you're right. You can try multiple ways, and that allows a sort of computational thinking approach to be able to solving a game and doing it in a very encouraging way. Games can be used as a contextual hub for learning. Take a simulation game like Roller Coaster Tycoon. You're building a theme park, you're understanding the physics of the rides that you're building, you're understanding the economy when you're pricing those rides, you're understanding staffing levels as you decide how much resource and overhead you want to apply to that theme park. And if you do it right, your virtual customers will enter your theme park. If you do it wrong, you can tweak the parameters. So you're encouraged to try again. And ultimately, over time, everyone can be a winner. It's not just you on a random day through an examination are right and you are wrong because you remembered the wrong things. So this is a great way, in a multidisciplinary way, of learning through games. Games like SimCity, you can study all sorts of things with SimCity, even urban regeneration. You can imagine the geography teacher goes into a class and said, okay kids, today we're going to do urban regeneration. You just see the colour just drain out of their faces. And yet with SimCity you can do that. You can learn about, you can step into history and understand the ramifications of the decisions you make by being part of history in civilization. You can understand physics. You can understand ethical problems in The Walking Dead. And the games like Minecraft, where you're building these wonderful 3D architectural worlds to incredible degrees and share them with your friends. I mean, who wouldn't want to become an architect after playing Minecraft? Games, going back to the simulation thing, for surgeons, for the armed forces, clearly there's no downside if you get things wrong when you're using simulation software. And people seem still hung up on games as being a bad thing. These simulations are games without the scoring. And people seem to think that you have to read more knowledge and clam up this hard drive with facts rather than teach them how to think. And so I usually say to them, well, when you're next flying across whatever ocean it is and you think about your pilot, how they learn to fly, would you prefer that they read by reading a book or using simulation software, which is, again, say, a game? So some of the greatest people we know in the world of technology have really said a lot of it's down to games. I mean, these four gentlemen all say, the missing words are playing and games, and they all attribute games to being a wonderful thing. Demis Hassabis, as clearly you know from DeepMind, and I once beat a board game, by the way. I wish he was here. I could sneer at him openly, but just he's always said that he's viewed his obsession with playing games as training his mind in multiple facets, and he's a great living example of the power of play. So if you can park your prejudice about one or two titles and think cognitively what's happening when you're playing a game, all these things are giving you life skills. These are meta skills for the 21st century, from just the problem solving to the creative components, etc. There was a program on Horizon about 18 months ago. I don't know if any of you saw it, but they were trying to find out were games effectively good or bad for you. And at the end of the program, they had some old people, and they did an MRI scan on them and said, go away with this tablet full of games and come back in a month later, which they did. And they played lots of puzzle games, little simple strategy games, and they did another MRI scan, and their cognitive activity had really increased substantially. And it was really put out there then that maybe we should be giving old people tablets to play on rather than tablets to swallow to solve their problems. And the other great things about games is the industry itself is a brilliant industry, and I mean it supports so many great causes and interacts and allows people to do things that they ordinarily can't do. And now Special Effects, of which I act as an ambassador, a fantastic charity. It gives children with severe disabilities the opportunity to play and engage with the world in which they wouldn't have otherwise done. They modify games technology to bring an experience for these children. I'll just show you a small video, and if you have the chance to help Special Effect, please do. That's the great work of Special Effects, and you never know. One day, maybe not in my lifetime, but you never know. So we play games. We love consuming content, but how do we actually make them, and how do we get more diversity into games from all society to reflect the content, particularly women? Well, we are a creative nation. Look at our film, our fashion, our music, our theatre, our publishing, and of course our games industry. And of course, video games brings art and technology like no other medium, I would suggest. The storytelling, the art, and the science and technology. And as Google knows more than any other company in the world, I'd say, there's a dearth of software engineers, not just for video games industry, but for all industries. And I was involved with campaigning to get computer science on the national curriculum. As an employer myself back in the day, it was kind of quite alarming what a difficulty it was to get coders and digital artists and software engineers of a kind of caliber to work in our industries. And it's not just about games, it's designing a jet propulsion engine or fighting cybercrime or the work you guys do here. It's just wasn't happening. So I went to Ed Vaizey, the former culture minister, and he pushed it straight back onto us and said, well, why don't you write a review? Which I did with Alex Hope of Double Negative and the fantastic researchers from Nesta who were funded all the work, and 7 Ipsos Murray studies, and gave us 2 fantastic researchers in Hassan Bakshi and Juan Mateus Garcia, and of course published the review. And we were talking about how we're going to turn children from being consumers to creators, how they're going to be empowered for the digital age. As Douglas Rushkoff said, do we direct technology, or we let ourselves be directed by it? Are we going to be in the driving seat or the passenger seat of this technology? So long story short, the main problem we found was that ICT, as was taught in schools, was not fit for purpose. It was largely a strange hybrid of office tutorials, boring kids to death with Word, PowerPoints and Excel, and giving them no insight how to create their own technology. So our main recommendation was to put computer science on the curriculum as essential discipline, because this was nothing new. Back in the 1980s, the BBC was a cornerstone of computing in schools, and at home everyone had a Specky, where they were doing an affordable programmable machine, and those 2 machines themselves were one of the instrumental reasons why the video games industry took off so early in the UK. And that all kind of got changed as schools were worried about people accessing the open internet and viruses and stuff, so they were just allowed to use other people's software rather than writing their own. Now, we did do a film, we haven't got time to show it today, but you can see it on YouTube, our next gen. It's about 40-minute longs, which we submitted again on our application. Of course, we're also thankful to Eric Schmidt, who referenced our next gen review in his Q&A at this Matt Taggart lecture, and he was saying how he was flabbergasted that computer science wasn't taught in schools. And of course, if Eric said it, has to be true, and the then Prime Minister echoed his words, saying we're not doing enough for programmers. And Mr. Popular, one thing you have to say in support of Michael Gove is that he was instrumental in making the change. He listened to not just what I was saying and Alex Hope was saying, but the whole world, including Google, the learner societies, every digital company in the world, in the UK just about, was saying the same thing. And he did allow the computing curriculum to take over from the ICT curriculum, which is a great thing. So 2014 that happened, computing is here. Who's going to be up for the challenge? Who's going to teach the teachers? I know this is some of the initiative that Google's doing. It's great. There are resources everywhere. Let's hope that creativity is essential to this, because a lot of it is dry, and I know a lot of children are not enjoying it. So we have to do a lot to make computer science exciting, show what can be done with this wonderful thing called code. I recently wrote a book called Hacking the Curriculum, which was free in this month's issue of Hello World, if you happen to get one. But this is trying to be a practical guide and a fun way for teachers to teach computer science. Because it can be argued that computer science is the new Latin, because it underpins the digital world in the way Latin underpinned the analog world. And I hated school, and a lot of children today hate it even more through the narrowness through which it's taught. And as Einstein said, the only thing that interferes with his learning was his education. And Generation Z are different. They are naturally connected. Again, you don't know more than anybody else how they happily share everything that they have. They naturally collaborate. Yet when they go into schools, that kind of is a different experience altogether. And with the furious rates of change, we have to train children, well, not train is the wrong word, but allow them to learn skills that are going to enable them to have jobs, be ready for jobs that don't yet exist. And the World Economic Forum recently said that for 2020, the 3 most important things for any child is complex problem solving, creativity, and critical thinking. Now, of course, it was okay back in the day for everyone to learn the same stuff, because you're just going to transplant these children who've all had their brains stuffed with the same facts into the factory because they're going to do the same thing. But we know the robots are coming, so there's no point in trying to train children like robots, because they won't actually be able to compete with the real thing. So we have to teach our children how to think. Now, one of the things I'm also doing at the moment is set up a foundation. We're going to be opening 2 academies in 2019, working in conjunction with Aspirations Academies Trust, one in Bournemouth and one in East London, trying to put some of the things that we believe in, some problem-based learning and projects and all the contextual learning to give real meaning and understanding for the children. So, knowledge is important, but know-how is equally important in my mind. So let's get some more practical work in the schoolroom. It seems to me that the government is pushing it more to academic success. Even arts exams now, you have to do written paper and theories and things, and we seem to be stripping creativity and diversity out of the curriculum rather than adding to it, if we're supposed to be the creative nation that is doing so well, our fastest growing sector. So let's allow children to enjoy what they read, especially Port of Peril. Now, if you start children off on Shakespeare, chances are you're going to put off reading for life. You read Shakespeare when you're ready for it. So whether it's comics or an interactive book, the point is to get children reading, to enjoy the experience and move on when they're ready to things that might be seen as more challenging. And let's not keep teaching the same things. We're not all academics, and yet require children to memorize formula. There's no reason. We have all these devices that can do the solving used of these formula. I gave a talk to about 500 teachers about a year or so ago and said, hands up, anyone could do this. And I think about 10 hands went up. I'm sure all your hands are going to go up, but we'll try it anyway. How many? Yeah, I knew that was going to happen. But I think you know what I'm saying. It's crazy. If you have devices that can do this, we have to have the context for children in mathematics, how to apply it, rather than being scared about it. So let's use games as a contextual hub. I mean, this child here is now understanding, by applying heat of the surface in the game of Minecraft to the silica sound that he's found, he can make glass, and that will live with him forever as he puts into the world he's created. And Lego is doing quite a lot too for creative education. So let's get this more of a hands-on approach, get them to build an app, make a game, do something in robotics, anything, get them making, not using, and allow them to collaborate. That's how we work in the workplace. It's not cheating, it's what we do. So why can't we have that in schools? And more introduction of code clubs, and accept our differences. I think this sums it up really. Together, are we saying the elephant's a failure because he can't climb a tree? Now, together we can do wonderful things because we are different. That's the important thing. The problem is, as Ken Robinson said, there's a problem with conformities in education, that people aren't standardized to begin with. So there's no point in judging everyone by the same metric. So I don't know why we're relentlessly going along that route. The Department for Education cites China as best practice for mathematics and wants to introduce Shanghai maths. At the same time, China is looking to the UK to see how can they move from made in China to designed in China. They want to move up the value chain of creativity. And so they want to know, how do you become creative? Well, we seem to be doing everything to strip creativity out of the classroom, which to my mind seems crazy. So again, Einstein was saying, imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is almost a given, thanks to Google in particular. So let's get children to dream and understand the value of the arts. It should not be no longer seen as either or. The diverse opinions, the self-expression, self-determination that the arts give is not just good for the creative industries, it's good for all industries. The greatest polymath of all time, Leonardo da Vinci, not just the world's best painter, but also an engineer and a mathematician. So let's embrace the STEAM agenda. Let's have arts front and central to education. It's not just about STEM. STEM arts should not be just seen as a facilitator and a nice to have to increase STEM performance. And let's stop punishing children for making mistakes. Failure is just success work in progress, as we saw in a game. So allow them to fail, not feel bad about it. We all have something great to do. We can all contribute. So all I'd say to finish is that in the analog world, the winners was really often down to the amount of capital they had, because they had to build physical goods and have expensive distribution channels, and that was quite complex. But today, any child given the right digital making skills and entrepreneurial spirit, wanting to do these things, allow them to build goods and services. They can access global markets through high-speed broadband and monetize the world. So I think there are equal digital opportunities that were not available in the analog world. So hopefully they'll start their own business. Hopefully they'll hang on to their own IP. They might not become the next Mark Zuckerberg, but maybe they will become a digital entrepreneur. Thank you.